Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Big Game Hunters. I'm Mike.
And I'm Tom. Today we're going to review Thunderstone Advance from AEG and designer Mike Elliot. But first, Chit Chat.
In today's Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about building a game collection, the idea of putting together a diverse library of games for any occasion, and the idea of games as collectibles. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Chit Chat. Today's Chit Chat is going to cover building a game library, the idea of putting together a collection that you can use for different occasions and to fit different tastes. So, Tom, how do you tend to go about purchasing new games? What are the criteria you use, not just for buying a game in and of itself for its own merits, but buying it to fit into your specific game library?
Well, as I've mentioned on the show before, I don't have a really avid gaming group. We game kind of occasionally, and then I do most of my gaming, well, like when I visit friends or conventions.
Or with yours truly.
Or with you. I did mention friends.
Well, yeah.
Through the duration of this show, that is rapidly being redefined. But how I define what game I'm going to buy, it's really not that difficult of a process. If I have fun playing a game and it's not too expensive, I usually buy it. Also, when I'm considering what games I'm going to keep at home versus like if I'm donating games to like the local library's game group or something like that. If for games that I keep at home, I generally will look for games that are quick. Like filler games are pretty common. Games that are not too expensive that I can take a risk on. So if I haven't really experienced the game, but I like the art or the box, or I've read something about it, if it's not too expensive, I'll take a chance on it because it might get played 2 or 3 times at home. But otherwise, for large games, I really only invest in those when I know I have people who are interested in playing them and they're going to get used,
Sure.
for their value.
Yeah, it's a big investment. You mentioned a kind of preponderance of filler games in your collection.
Yeah.
Is that because last week in the show you said that you mostly frame your game nights around a role-playing game?
Yeah, traditionally for the last several years, it's been mostly role-playing games that we all get together to play, and then we just fill in some time with filler games, light and easy ones.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Me personally, I like to look at a number of things when I'm buying a game. I usually don't get to demo a game before I buy it. Most of it is research. So occasionally, at Origins or Gen Con, I'll play something and pick it up right away, and that's fine. That's usually an easy decision. Mm-hmm. If I played it and I enjoy it, of course. But most of my games in my collection have come from me having to kind of look them up, watch reviews, like this show, read written reviews. So it's a little bit harder to determine whether it's going to be something I really want to put in my collection or not. I have limited shelf space at this point. When you're first starting out building your library, it's a little easier, I think, because you don't have to worry like that so much. You kind of, when you're first starting out, you have a lot of space. The cost is still prohibitive, but you can be a little bit, you can put more stuff in without worrying about it. Now, if I'm putting a game in, I often will have to push a game out to make room.
Sure.
So size is a big factor. Something like Guillotine, which we talked about last week, it keeps its slot pretty easily. It is held a little bit lower standard for me because it doesn't take up much room.
Sure. It's
portable and it's not pushing other things out of the way. Also, I really like to look at what else is similar to the game that I'm looking at. So, for instance, I enjoy Dominion. I don't have any problem with it other than I think that the base game isn't terribly replayable.
Sure.
So I would not have a problem with investing in Dominion and various expansions. But I like today's game, Thunderstone, even more.
Much better.
So I like both of them. They're both deck builders, but they're pretty similar at their core.
Sure.
So I don't really want to invest in both in my collection. There's a lot of space and time and money spent in investing in a deck builder like that. So a lot of it, I think, has to do with our originality score at the end, or if it's implemented the best. So if I find a game that I think just kind of outdoes another, if it's similar enough that I don't feel like I'm compelled to have both, I usually don't pick up the other one. For instance, Bang versus what's the game? Kung Fu Fighting.
Oh.
Two very similar kind of
Sure.
party games.
Sure.
You have a role, you're playing action cards on one another, fast and loose games. I have both, but it's kind of hard to validate having them both. I don't really bring out Kung Fu Fighting much because Bang takes precedence. So when I have 2 similar games, it's tough. Warriors keeps a slot because it's a lighter version of the deck builders. And that's kind of why I have Grimoire too. We talked about Grimoire in a previous episode. Grimoire is a lighter, faster role selector game than Mission Red Planet. So sometimes a game can do something better than another, and that gets us a slot in my collection.
I think the only other consideration I have, I've never really looked at the role games play in my library. As my collection expands, I'm sure I'll start. But the one thing I have looked at in the past is usefulness for the game outside of board games. So since I play so many role-playing games, I have a tendency to pick up
cannibalize the pieces.
I will pick up role-playing or board games with, especially miniatures that I can use to represent whatever else on the battlefield of a role-playing game.
Yeah.
So especially like science fiction board games are good for that because the science fiction miniatures lines just aren't all that prevalent. You have plenty of fantasy lines, but not too many science fiction lines. So I do cannibalize those games, but then I make sure to put them back in the box because I still have that dream that we're going to,
Get some
have those game nights.
I think for the other major consideration of mine besides shelf space and originality would be having games for different occasions. So, sometimes I go up to a friend's lake house and I want lighter games because that's a group that's not as into gaming as my core group, but they still enjoy board games. So for that, I want to have games, like Guillotine, like Grimoire, things that are a little lighter, like Ticket to Ride, things that, can kind of be introductory level stuff that I can still enjoy, things that have enough strategy to keep me interested, but aren't so much to overwhelm them. And that can handle a variety of players, a number of players. So, I have kind of games in my head that are best with certain numbers, and I'd like to keep those in my collection because, there's a lot of different 3-player games. Some work better than others. In addition, on the flip side, some games I don't feel scale into certain numbers of players. So a deck builder game, I think, really is optimal with 3. If you're adding 4, you're lengthening the game, but you're not really deepening the gameplay.
Sure.
I don't think you're adding a lot of fun for everybody if you add another player. You're just adding more waiting time.
And the reverse is true with games like party games. If you've only got 3 people, you don't really want to play Taboo or whatever. You want something a lot lighter. So
when you're first starting out, I'd say one of the most important things actually is to try to get every number covered. Sure. Kind of go from like 1 to 7 players if you're trying to game in all different situations, and say, do I have a game that works well in this number, or am I stretching it?
That's good advice.
Thanks, Tom.
Was there anything else we needed to cover about?
So another thing I think is the idea of games not just building your collection of games, but games as collectible items.
Yes.
I think that for a long time there have been a lot of out-of-print games. Games, unlike maybe other medium like movies or books, frequently go out of print, and it's very, very hard to get them. You've had a secondary market on eBay for a number of years with games like our favorite Epic Duels. I picked up a ton of out-of-print games. Blue Moon, the card game, the Marvel Heroes game. I can't think of anything.
I've picked up a few myself.
Risk 2210's out of print now, right?
No, they've re-released it. Yeah, it was out of print for a short while.
Avalon Hill titles, particularly Queen's Gambit.
Yep.
Those go out of print. Those are kind of well-known out-of-print good title. Nexus Ops, before it got reprinted, love the original version.
I'm particularly fond of kind of old games, like early 90s or maybe even earlier. Mage Stones from TSR and the X-Men game. I can't remember who published it, but it was like the 90s cartoon X-Men.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And it's good?
No, these are terrible games. They are terrible games, but they're fun and nostalgic to keep in your library and bring them out, especially when you get somebody in your group. Like maybe it's a smaller table or you've got 4 people and you start talking about the mechanics of a game. It's really fun to bring those out and say, here's this game that, the title or the property is something we might be interested in, but the implementation was just so horrible.
Right.
Imagine what you could do with this.
And then I think that's kind of almost come full circle now with Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I think Kickstarter has really upped the ante in terms of collectability for games because of the Kickstarter exclusive promos. You have something like last year's Zombicide, which made so much money. It made so many stretch goals that they put really gorgeous sculpts in that game, and everyone, it kind of one thing led to another. As soon as it started getting all this tons of stuff in this box, people jumped on board even more, and it kind of was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And with Zombicide, it goes for hundreds of bucks on eBay because of all the rare stuff that you could get with it. And I mean there's tons of examples of that where a game has come out through Kickstarter with Kickstarter promos, and now it's like it is an out-of-print game almost, even
Yeah.
if you can still get the base game. Or Small World Leaders. The Small World Leaders expansion was like $40 on eBay at one point. It's now been re-released, but it was just one token for every race.
Yep.
It's literally a piece of cardboard with a token for every race, but you just can't get it. And people who love Small World want everything for Small World.
I think there's a lot actually to say about how Kickstarter is changing the board game industry. We might want to use it on a different Chit Chat.
Sure, I can get behind that, Tom. So do you have anything to add about collectability?
No, I don't. I think we've covered about everything we can say.
I give it a 95 completeness on this Chit Chat. And that takes us to the tutorial on Thunderstone. Now I'm going to teach you how to play Thunderstone Advance. Thunderstone Advance is a deck building game where each player controls a band of heroes that will try to move through the dungeon and kill all the monsters. To win the game, you'll have to have the most victory points in your deck at the game end. The game ends when the Thunderstone bearer is either defeated in rank 2 or 3 of the dungeon or escapes the dungeon by reaching rank 1. As soon as he is defeated or escapes, the game ends and players simply tally all the victory points in their deck. The player with the highest score wins. If there is a tie, the player who has the Thunderstone bearer wins. If there is still a tie, then the tied player who has the most experience points left wins the game. Thunderstone is a deck building game that means business. It features a lot of different card types, so I'm going to be throwing cards at you left and right. Try to stay with me. First, I'm going to go over the general categories of cards, then common symbols seen on cards, and finally, important keywords that you'll encounter. The first type of card are heroes. Heroes are the primary way that you'll engage with the monsters. Your basic deck will include 6 of these regulars. They are the weakest of the heroes. Next up, we have items. Items will frequently give you light, but can do a wide variety of effects. Third, we have weapons. Weapons must be wielded by heroes in order to be effective. They will usually add physical or magical attack to your tableau. Then we have magic spells. Spells do not require a hero to cast, and you're usually used to do magic damage to monsters. They can also occasionally give you light or perform other effects like items. Next up are villagers. Villagers also include the subtype of mercenaries, which can do damage to monsters, like heroes and weapons. However, villagers can do a wide variety of effects and will often help you in the village. Next up are curses. You will never purchase curses willingly, but curses are given to you by monster effects. They are almost always negative. Next up, we have familiars. Familiars are a new type of card to Thunderstone Advance, and you will gain them once per game when you kill a monster. Finally, we have the monsters. The monsters will be moving through the dungeon hall, and you have to fight them in order to gain victory points and win the game. To continue the overview of the cards, I'm now going to show you various symbols that are common to most cards. At the top of the card, you'll see its name, and below that, several subtypes. Along the left edge of the card, you'll see at the top a gold value in the gold coin. On your turn, you'll add up all your gold values, and that's what you'll have to spend to buy cards from the village. Below that, you'll see weight for a weapon or strength for a hero. These are linked terms because the strength of a hero determines how heavy the weapon he can wield. Below that, you'll see a light source, assuming that it provides one. If nothing is there, the item does not affect the light in the dungeon. But if you see a number in a light source, then it will either increase or decrease the level of darkness. In the middle of the card, you'll see a number in a bag. That number is how much gold you have to pay in order to buy this card from the village. In the bottom left-hand corner of a card, you might see an experience point value. On a monster, this is how much experience you'll gain when you defeat it. On a hero, this is the number of experience you must spend in order to level up the hero. At the top right of a monster, you'll see its health value. This is how much damage you have to deal the monster in a combination of magical and physical attack in order to defeat it. The final element of a Thunderstone card is the gameplay text. This text will often include a keyword which will tell you when that effect takes place. Note that this will not be a completely exhaustive list of keywords because future releases may introduce new ones. First up, we have physical and magical attack. Physical and magical attack stack under normal conditions and are used to oppose the monster's health value. You'll simply add up your total physical and magical attack for the fight, and then if it equals or exceeds the monster's health, then you have defeated it. Next up, we have village effects and dungeon effects. A village effect can only be used while in the village, and a dungeon effect while in the dungeon. Neither of these effects are mandatory, but each can only be used one time unless you see repeat dungeon or repeat village. Next up, you'll see spoils. If you use a card with spoils on it during a fight and defeat a monster, you'll gain the spoils effect. Monsters, however, have battle effects. These battle effects happen when the fight starts and can change the outcome of the battle. Conversely, monsters can possess aftermath effects. These are generally penalties for defeating the monster, but come into play whether or not you kill the monster when you fight it. These do not affect the outcome of the battle and are applied afterward. Next up, we have global effects in red text. Global effects affect the entire hall and are active no matter where the monster is, not just when you're fighting it. A breach effect on a monster activates as soon as the monster enters rank 1 of the dungeon hall. These can often affect the village, as the monster is depicted as invading the village. Finally, monsters can have trophy effects. These effects do not come into play when the monster is actually being fought, but are mandatory when they're in your hand. Thunderstone's setup is a little time-consuming and follows 3 phases. First, you'll build the dungeon deck. To do so, you'll use the dungeon randomizer cards to choose 3 types of monsters. You'll choose a level 1 monster, like these skeletons, a level 2 monster, like these ogres, and a level 3 monster, like these dragons. You'll shuffle all 3 decks together to form one 30-card dungeon deck. Then, you'll add one random Thunderstone bearer to the mix. You'll shuffle him into the bottom 10 cards of the dungeon deck. Then, you'll take the top 3 cards and place them into rank 1, 2, and 3 of the dungeon. Then, you'll also randomize heroes and village cards. To randomize the hero cards, you simply take hero randomizers and draw 4. You'll take the appropriate hero stacks and place them in the hero slots here. Then, you'll take the village randomizer cards and shuffle them up and draw 8 random village cards. You'll place the appropriate stacks in the slots as shown. You can have any combination of different village cards, but it's recommended that you don't use too many of any one type. In addition to whatever you randomize, you'll always have access to torches, long spears, and regulars. Once you've built all the decks, it's time to build your personal basic decks. To do so, you'll simply take 6 regulars, 2 long spears, 2 torches, and finally 2 Thunderstone shards. You'll shuffle these 12 cards together to form your basic deck. Now it's time to determine who will begin the game. This is done randomly, but my group likes to do something we call leading with light. To do so, you'll simply flip cards off the top of your basic deck until one player reveals a torch. If 2 players reveal a torch simultaneously, then you'll keep going between the tied players until another torch is revealed. The player who reveals the first torch begins the game. Once that's done, you'll again shuffle your basic decks and everyone will draw their 6 cards starting hand. Now you're ready to play Thunderstone. Thunderstone is played in turns, and on your turn, you can do one of 4 different things. One thing you can do on your turn is go to the dungeon. When you do so, you'll reveal your hand and first activate any dungeon effects that you'd like to use. Then, you'll choose a monster in the dungeon hall to fight. At that time, you'll activate any of the monster's appropriate battle effects, and then you'll compare your total attack to the monster's health value. If your attack meets or exceeds the monster's health value, taking into account any light penalties applied by the level of the dungeon, then you will defeat the monster. If you defeat the monster, you will resolve any of its aftermath effects, and then place it in your discard pile. Finally, you will gain experience equal to the amount of experience points in the bottom left of the card. If, however, you do not defeat the monster because your total attack is not as high as the monster's health value, then the monster instead retreats to the bottom of the dungeon deck. When this happens, you still resolve any of the monster's aftermath effects, but the monster is not defeated and you do not gain experience. Either way, any remaining monsters will shift one rank up in the hall, and you'll draw monsters to fill the hall to replace the ones that have been killed or retreated. The second thing you can choose to do on a turn is go to the village. Again, you'll reveal your entire hand and activate any village effects that you'd like to use. Then, you can buy one card from the top of any one village stack. To do so, you'll simply add up all the gold values in your hand, and you may use that amount in order to buy one card of equal or lesser cost. When you buy a card, you'll simply take it from the top of the stack and place it in your discard pile. Then, while you're still in the village, you can level up any number of heroes as long as you have the appropriate number of experience points. To level up a hero, you'll destroy it from your hand and then spend a number of experience as shown in the bottom corner. When you do so, you'll take a hero from the stack one level higher than the one you destroyed. If you would like to level up a regular, formerly militia, then you will use the number of experience in the corner and level it up into any level 1 hero that is available in the stacks. If you don't go to either the dungeon or the village, then you can rest. When you rest, you simply destroy any one card in your hand and then end your turn. Finally, and new to Thunderstone Advance, you may prepare. When you prepare, you'll choose any number of cards in your hand and place them on top of your draw pile. Then, no matter what you've done in your turn, any of the 4 actions, you will discard all cards in your hand and then draw 6 new ones from the top of your deck. Now you know how to play Thunderstone Advance. Now that you know how to play Thunderstone, it's time to take a look at it in our point-counterpoint review.
Mike and I don't quite agree on this game, so he's going to argue for it, and I'm going to argue against it. Take it away.
I'm going to explain, Tom, why this is the game to end all games. Primarily, it's because it's the most dynamic deck-building game on the market. This one takes the core mechanics from Dominion, throws in some variables, which sounds like it's just fluffing things up. You know, it sounds like inelegant design,
Sure.
Something I'm not a fan of, but in this case, it works. When you add in the light and the light penalties, you add in magical and physical attack, you add in weight for the weapons, a wide variety of different spell effects that uses these variables. Mm-hmm. You have gold. You have all these different stats on the cards. It doesn't just add complexity; it adds depth. So because of all the different variables on the cards, because of all the different kind of things you're juggling with your turn, it really means that the game becomes more dynamic than the other deck builders. With the Monster Hall and monsters coming out that are immune to magic, take half magic, immune to physical, kill a certain number of heroes, can't be fought without a certain number of heroes, all these different kind of twists on it make it so that you have to make your deck adaptable. You have to, on the fly, be able to integrate new things in your deck. Halfway through, something starts pumping out diseases, you need to get yourself a cleric.
Yep.
And it's that kind of gameplay, that strategic, and at the same time very kind of flexible, very kind of in-the-moment gameplay that draws me to Thunderstone again and again.
Everything you say is true about Thunderstone. And especially when you're comparing it to the games that came before, particularly Dominion. But this is Thunderstone Advance, Mike. Thunderstone Advance made a few key changes between Thunderstone and this one. It wasn't that long ago that Thunderstone was released, but some of those key changes sort of fundamentally changed the gameplay, and I think in a bad way. Here, let me tell you why. Stick with me here. This is a long one. So, one of the primary changes they made was the range of monsters that you see. Agree?
Sure.
Okay. So, if that's true, that the range of monsters are now more accessible earlier in the game. One of the draws for the first edition of Thunderstone were those epic games where all you had, you were fighting, like basilisks and dragons and demons, and everybody had to band together just to enter the dungeon, just to get the ball rolling. Mm-hmm. you don't
because you didn't have the monster levels.
Right. You don't see that anymore now because it's a pretty good chance you're going to find an introductory monster. Mm-hmm. You combine that with the additional elements of gaining experience that you can do outside of combat. The beginning, middle, and the end of the game have sort of now been muddled into, it's accessible and it's a little more flexible, but it's never going to be as epic as it was.
I couldn't have said it better myself. But, that said, even though this one has been kind of made more accessible, you have the upgraded base decks, which help you get rolling sooner, like Tom said, I can forgive it because it's still so immersive. Through the whole line, the game has been very, very thematic, especially for a deck builder. Dominion, you can really rename the cards anything you want, and they won't change much. We mentioned this in an earlier episode, but, Feast, giving you extra actions and buys, that doesn't have any connection.
Sure.
With these, when you play something like Mass Teleport and you get a bunch of cards at once, or when you play Royal Summons and 3 regulars come into the fight and then they're warped out at the end, you feel like you're doing something. You feel like you're immediately aware of the spell you're casting, the sword you're swinging. You can feel the heft of the sword in your hand. You can feel the crackle of the thunder when you cast it. And that is totally lacking in other deck builders and tableau builders. They're great mechanically, but they just totally fall flat thematically. This one combines both into a beautiful package.
Can't deny that. Part of the reason it is so immersive is the different options that you get with like the symbols on the cards, the cost it's going to generate in your hand, and the weight versus the strength that you're going to carry it. But I also think that's kind of a con. It feels like they just missed the final stage of development on this, because it is a little bit easy to confuse. It's going to take you a few plays to just remember that on an item, that little package symbol right there, that's weight. But on a hero, well, regular, but still, that symbol is strength. And you have the same kind of thing with the cost to buy it versus the amount it's going to generate in your hand, and the other one, text on the card. Because you're looking for physical attack or magic attack, you're looking to build your combat power. That's a statistic, but it's incorporated into the rules text of the card. It's just a little counterintuitive to find it there.
Yeah, I'm surprised that one made it through to advanced.
Yeah.
But all that said, Tom, the game just has so much flexibility to it. You can play it in a variety of different settings. The rulebook has like 5 different variants that you can use. You can run an epic game of Thunderstone like Tom Vassal does with every card in the mix. You can run a campaign where you play game after game, collect the Thunderstones, start with them in your deck. You can do a random dungeon or a pseudo-random dungeon. There's just so many ways you can set the game up, so many ways you can play it. It's good for anybody.
It is good for anybody if you can get past the setup phase. I think everyone who plays this is going to agree it takes just way too much shuffling and unmixing and pre-deck generation, the random deck generator. There's just too much of that for the gameplay. Setup time takes too long.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. It really does take a really long time to get into the game. But on the whole, the game is still super fun. I love it. I think Mike Elliot hits another one out of the park for me. It works really well. All the variables coalesce into a really deep game. Every time feels different. I could run the same few heroes several games and still feel like I'm doing something fresh. Always feel like I'm building a cool engine. For me, perfect 10 out of 10.
Wow.
That's right.
Well, I think by now everybody knows that deck builders aren't my favorite kind of game, so that's going to bring it down some. But I did love the original Thunderstone. Thunderstone Advance is it's a great deck building game. So if I'm going to be forced to play one, I'm going to choose this one. I'll give it a 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10? It's a little harsh, Tom, but I'll take it. Now it's time to break it down.
This is the breakdown of Thunderstone Advance from AEG and designer Mike Elliot. The time it takes to play Thunderstone will vary. Setup takes a long time, and the more players you have, the longer the game will take. But in the long run, you're going to average about 2 hours a game, so we give it 65 long and 35 short. The turns move very quickly, but you're not doing much on your opponent's turn. so it's an even 50-50 split on the fast-slow scale. We give it 20 luck because the order the monsters come out is random, and especially in the early game you can get a good or a bad draw, but otherwise it's all skill-based, so we give it 80 skill. There are a few tactical decisions surrounding when you go to the town or to the dungeon, so we give it 20 tactics. But most of your decisions surround optimizing your deck to kill monsters, so we give it 80 strategy. It is a deck building game, so you're mostly focused on your own deck, so we give it 80 independence. But we do give it 20 interaction, because there are a handful of options for messing with your opponent's deck. Thunderstone is roughly equal on immersion and abstraction, which is impressive for a deck builder. We give the edge to immersion because so many elements fit the dungeon adventure theme, from items and spells to monsters and light levels, so we give it a 55 immersion and 45 abstraction. We give it 40 simplicity and 60 complexity because it's not terribly hard to learn and it's impressively flexible with all the modes you can use. It takes up a huge amount of table space, but it is just a card game, so we give it 30 portability and 70 grandeur. We give it 5 completeness because it is a better game than its predecessors, but it won't take many plays before you want to see more items, characters, and monsters, so we give it 95 expandability. We give it 2 trophies for originality. Unfortunately, it's practically a clone of Dominion, but it is far more engaging and dynamic. For value, we give it 3 trophies. There's nothing too exceptional about the components, but everything's a fair price and you do get a lot of game. Mike gives it a 10 out of 10, Tom gives it a 6 out of 10, and that is the breakdown of Thunderstone Advance.
We hope you enjoyed slaying monsters with us today in Thunderstone. Next week in the Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about board games versus digital board games versus video games. And we're going to be taking a look at Steve Jackson's Munchkin.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for regular updates, see the links below for our Facebook and Twitter pages, and leave us a comment on your game library.
See you next week.
But first, Chit Chat.
I'm sorry, I made a weird face. You sounded funny and I made a funny face. Don't sound funny.
Good thing I'm going to forget this after my next sentence.
Hmm?
Mm-hmm.